Okay, my clock has just clicked over to whatever time it is where you are right now, 11 a.m. for me in Brisbane, me engine. And so welcome everybody. I'm Janine and I'm here to work through NVivo with you today, which I'm super excited about. I met with many of you last week and hopefully you felt after last week's session enough so that you could get started with NVivo, get some data in, do some coding and run some basic queries. So if you felt good about that last week, excellent. That's where we were hoping to be. And today really is an advanced deep dive into NVivo, where we get to explore the more advanced features of the software. And I guess this really is a point where often people come to me and say, I've done my coding, where do I go next? And that's what we're going to explore today. So as a bit of an intro, remembering I'm Janine, I think everyone here was here last week. So again, thank you for joining us. And we're going to talk about mastering qualitative analysis with NVivo with a focus on mixed methods. So there's some really great new features actually in NVivo that help to support mixed methods research. So we'll certainly explore them today. Today is really around deep analysis and how do we ask questions of the data. So as you may recall, last week was very much around setting strong foundations for your research. And today is about using those strong foundations to then do all the other things that you need to do in your research. So certainly spending the time to set your project up thoughtfully can help save you time later. And that's not to say that there's a wrong way to set up an NVivo project, but there are more efficient ways than others. And so today we're going to talk about setting up efficient coding schemes, for instance. Again, there's no wrong way to do it, but there are certainly things to think about to hopefully, engage in best practice. So that's what we're looking at today. A couple of people joining us. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And part of today is also looking more at those visualizations and how to represent the data outside of the software. Because there's one thing in terms of using a tool, but we also need to then share that beyond the tool. And I'm always, as you may remember from last week, I think, what would I do without the software? The software really is a superpower for us. It helps to supercharge and allow us to do more with the data than we can do manually. But I always think of what would I do without the software? So in this way, I think, what do I want the outputs of my research to be? And then I go to NVivo for it to help me to achieve those outputs. So knowing what I want and where I want to go is really helpful to then use the software and its tools to help me to get there. The software is really only as good as its driver, like any software. If I don't know what I'm doing, then I'm probably not going to get what I need out of it. So making those decisions prior to coming to the software. So following our gurus of qualitative research, as we talked a little bit about last week, we've got people like John Creswell, Joseph Maxwell, David Silverman, who are all gurus in qualitative research. And their work absolutely applies here, even though they don't talk about software per se. However, what we do is use the software to apply the best practice and the guidance and the rules, I guess, around doing qualitative research so that we can then use NVivo as a tool, much like we use Microsoft Word as a tool to help us to achieve those outcomes. As you know, using something like Microsoft Word allows us to do so much with the written word that we can't do when we write manually. I write a lot of things on pen and paper. I have a digital pen and paper that I use, but certainly nothing really replaces using something like Microsoft Word, and NVivo is the same. It's that tool that helps us to take a project management perspective of our research, to put everything in one place so we can access it easily, and then we can draw connections and conclusions from that. We touched very briefly last week on cases and classifications, and we'll spend much more time talking about them today and how they can help us to look for patterns in the data. And we talked about memos. We'll revisit. We'll do a little revisit of last week's session before we jump in today. What NVivo is really, really good at is bringing multiple data sources together. And last week, we spent a lot of time with documents and things. We looked a little bit on photos. We touched on transcriptions and things like that. Audio, video, we have social media. There are many different forms of data that we can use and bring into our research. And again, that's really difficult to do manually, where we have different, let's say an interview and a photograph. It's really hard to combine the analysis of those when we work manually. NVivo, however, allows us to bring them together, and particularly if we're looking at mixed method research, to bring together survey data and particularly the open-ended, closed-ended, and connect that to, say, our interview data. And NVivo allows us to do that in a very seamless way. So we can look at similar themes across both data sets. And in mixed method research, often we'll do a qualitative study first to find out what's going on, what are the issues. Then we may do a quantitative study to measure those things. And then often we'll follow that up with a qualitative study to explore what we found in the survey. Most of us don't get the luxury of being expert at qual and quant. However, through mixed methods, we can bring the different methods together. And if we come back to why do we choose qual? Why do we choose quant? It really comes down to the questions that we're asking. And if I'm asking what and when type questions, so what is going on and when did it happen, or at what points do these things happen, that usually lends themselves to quantitative techniques. And in very basic terms, quantitative research is about counting and measuring. Let's flip that in terms of qual. And if we're asking the how and the why type questions, they then lend themselves to qualitative research. So we shouldn't really come to our research and go, I want to do qualitative research. What we should be doing instead, which many of us do, and no judgment there, but what we should be doing is saying, these are the questions I want to explore, and therefore qualitative research is the best approach to answer those questions. The beauty of mixed methods research is we can answer all the questions. So we can answer the what, the when, the how, and the why. So it allows us to use qualitative to answer that, what we need there, and quantitative to answer what we need there, and then to bring them back together and to bridge that gap. That's what we're going to explore today. And really interrogating the data. And this is where, the software really does shine, and kind of why we use software is so that we can ask really quite detailed questions of the data and of our coding. So the problem with working manually or working with an Excel spreadsheet to code our data is we get to a point and we kind of have to stop. So we've coded, we've color coded, we've done all of that work, or we've cut and pasted in a spreadsheet. But we get to a point and we're like, well, what do I do with that? And beyond cutting up paper and sticking them on walls and things, which I have absolutely seen people do, I've seen people put transcripts on the wall with string between parts that are relevant to each other. Not very practical when we want to make sense of it. So the underlying concept is the same in NVivo, is that we want to look for those patterns in the data, and data analysis is all about looking for patterns in the data to help us to understand what's going on. And the queries are the way that we do that in NVivo, and they really are the power of the software. We touched briefly last week on our word frequencies and text searches. We're going to revisit them again today in a little more detail, and then add to them the coding and the matrix coding, and also a crosstab query as well. And the crosstab, the matrix and the crosstab are ways for us to start to bring the quant and the qual data together. Doing some visualizations, as we mentioned, is a way of sharing our results. Now, I put one little caveat on visualizations is know your audience. If you have a pure qualitative audience, they don't really tend to like visualizations, partly because it feels like we're trying to quantify the data, even though we're not. So just know your audience. A mixed method audience is far more open to visualizations of the data to tell the story. So just know your audience. And hopefully you're going to leave today with some really practical skills. And again, my mantra is always don't get stuck. There's always help available for you, lots and lots of help available. And really, I can't stress enough that it's all about practice, 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 practice. Like any new skill, learning a software tool like NVivo takes practice. And so don't assume you're going to be amazing at it the first time. It's certainly not going to be the case, but go with your gut and go with what feels right and go with what you would do with pen and paper. And then we bring those techniques and skills here to NVivo. And by approaching it that way, rather than just clicking on buttons to see what they do, you'll certainly, I think, find your way through the software a little more meaningfully. And so I have a few exercises at the end of these slides. I believe you have access to these slides. And so there are a number of exercises at the end for you to practice your skills. I suggest, again, turning your internet off when you're using NVivo. Do a fresh restart of your machine and it will run much smoother if everything is turned off. Yeah, settle in, get comfortable, open it every morning so that you're working on it each day for maybe things you didn't realize. You might have, for instance, if you're teaching, you might have a student evaluation that you'd like to pop into NVivo. Adding literature to it over time. Again, I run courses on literature reviews just because what we do with interview data is very similar to what we do with literature. And so NVivo is great at dealing with massive amount of data. And I have seen a project that had I worked on a project that had 2,500 files. So I haven't yet found a limit for NVivo. It's really just the limit of how much power of your PC. So as I mentioned, there's a few exercises here, which I'm going to leave you with. And again, you'll have access to the slides, but just thinking about, how you set your project up, how to set up coding frameworks, which we'll talk more about today, how to bring in our cases that we mentioned, and creating something of an audit trail, which we started last week with our project diary. So I'm going to leave that there and I'm going to stop sharing and share my other screen. So just give me 1 second to do so. Okay, so just confirming you can now see my NVivo. I believe you can. Again, if I'm looking away, it's just because I have 2 screens. Awesome. Thanks, Emmett. Appreciate your feedback. Wonderful. Okay, so I will have a little recap of what we covered last week. Once more, feel free to ask questions at any time at all. There are no silly questions. And again, thinking about NVivo as a bit of a need-to-know basis. So what do you need right now to get started? You may not be at the point of where we are today. So the things that I demonstrate, you may not be here yet. But as you may know, I'm a big fan of the endpoint. And where do we want to get to at the end? And then let's design a plan and a process to get there. So even though, again, you may not be where we are today, you may be here in 3 months' time. You might just be working on your coding right now, which is totally okay. But knowing what you can do with the data certainly helps you to make decisions early in your project. So if you know the kinds of queries you can run, then it's going to, give you some idea on how to set your project up. Because if depending on how you set your project up, it will define the things that you can do with the data. Again, not saying you can't change those things, but if we have the foresight to plan them early, that certainly makes our life a little bit easier later on. So ideally, we come back to our research questions. We think, what do we want to know? I always have my research questions, plastered on the wall in front of me. So I'm always thinking about them and they're front and center. And you may have one overall research question and then maybe a list of sub-questions that will help you to answer that research question. Write all of those questions down. And then what we want to do is we want to go and sort of translate them into how we're going to do them in NVivo. And there should be, even from the very beginning, if you kind of know what you want to do, which we don't always, but it's sometimes more than others in projects, we can then plan those things from the very beginning. So I know when I have students, PhD students come and talk to me about their research, within the first couple of minutes, I can visualize the things that we're going to do in NVivo just by them talking through their research questions. And I can start to see the things that we need to do to set things up so that they can actually get those outcomes. And hopefully you'll start to see some of that today. Excellent. We're going to work with the sample project today. So last week we set up a brand new project and we added data and we ran some queries and did some coding and played with codes and so on. This week we're going to work with the sample project that comes with NVivo. And so You all have access to this project, which is why it's a really useful tool for me to use to demonstrate, which I've been doing forever. And the nice thing about the sample project is it's kind of like a grown-up project. It has everything in it that you could possibly do. So every data source, lots of coding, lots of queries, lots of visualizations, has all of those things in there that help you to use the software to its all of its abilities. Again, you may not use all of the features in NVivo, and I find that most people don't. I don't. And I certainly don't use them all on one project, or certainly not all at one time. So knowing that these tools are in my toolkit, in my hip pocket here, I have them for when I need them, is a really useful thing. So even if you're not using them right now, knowing that they're there and that you can use them later is a great thing. You can come back to the recording at any time and work your way through side by side. And the sample project, again, the fact that you have access to it, it's a really, really great learning tool. And it's certainly how I learned a little bit about NVivo, because I could go there and say, oh, I remember doing that in the training. Let's see the sample project and how that was done, because you're using exactly the same example, or you have access to the one we're demonstrating today. So I'm going to open the sample project here on the first screen, just by simply clicking Sample Project, and it will open an instance of the project that comes with the software. Again, I'm working on a Windows machine today. A Mac will look a little bit different. I'm going to skip the tour because I'm going to take you on the tour. So I'll talk you through, again, thinking of what we have down the left here. Now, if you're working on version 14, this will be a blue bar. Version 15 is a purple bar. And knowing how to get to, if you want to know what version of the software you're working on, we pop up to File. I'll just pop back there, I jumped ahead. We go to File, like any file menu on any software that you have, and we have an option for Product Info. From here, we can have a look at the About NVivo and see what version we're working on. So I'm on version 15.4.0. This isn't your full license key, by the way, there's extra characters there. But NVivo, at any time, if we go to, there was a software update option there. So if we go to File, Product Info, check for software updates. Now, often it will do it automatically for you and tell you when there's a new update. But if you're not sure, you can always check. And Lumivero, who makes NVivo software, do release little, they'll release, little updates here and there before a big release. And often they're quite helpful. So for instance, the crosstab updates that I talked about that kind of help us with mixed method, they're a little update that was released recently. So it's always good just to keep up to date if possible. Excellent. So I'm going to talk you through the different files, different codes and way of coding, and we're essentially going to work our way down this navigation bar on the left-hand side here. Okay, thanks, Pima. So version 15.3. So if you wanted to do a software update, you'll get the newest version, and that should just add that for you. In saying that, though, it really doesn't matter. I know people still working in version 14, and it just means there's a couple of features that may not be available. And often they're only tiny things anyway. So either way is totally okay. Yeah, I totally understand that, Emmett, that often we have to go back to IT to get them to approve it, so it's a bit of a drama. But I think if you're back on 15.1, there's been like 3 updates at least since then, so I probably would go and update that when you can. So maybe every 3 months you go back to them and ask for that update. But I totally understand how challenging that can be when you're working on a university or a organization computer. Not so straightforward. Thank you for that. Excellent. So here we are. Let's have a walk through some of the files to get started. So as you know, we can have folders of files, or you can have no folders of files. It really is up to you and how organized you want to be. Let's not get caught up in folders, though. We don't want to have like one folder with one file, another folder with another file. That's not the best organizational structure. Think of folders as your filing cabinet, if you've ever used a filing cabinet, and you have labels in there, and those labels point you to different things. And we don't have too many of those labels because it doesn't really make sense. We have different ways of organizing the data. But really, it's just a storage place for us to get the data in and keep it for safekeeping. I recommend you have folders based on each of the data types in your research. So for instance, here they have folders around things related to, these aren't really data types, but they have mostly images here. They have interviews, which are Word documents, and they also have a couple of other file formats. They have a folder for literature, news articles, social media, which we can talk about, and survey data. So the key parts of the key types of data that they're working with, and the main reason, well, a couple of reasons why we use folders, but one main reason is you'll notice when we start to run queries on the software, having data in folders means that we can say, just look at the interviews, or just look at the survey data, or just look at the literature. So it sort of scopes our search for us. And then what that actually means is we can then compare, for instance, what was said in the survey data versus the interview data versus literature. They're the kinds. Absolutely, we can have subfolders. Thank you, Christine. Yes, what you'll so you can go down. So if I was to right click on a folder here, I can create a new folder and that will pop it underneath. So let's have a look at that. I'm just going to call it test for now. And you can pop that underneath. So you can go down, I'm not quite sure how far. I wouldn't recommend going any more than 4 levels down though. You do kind of get lost. And as I mentioned, there's other ways to organize the data. It's really that filing cabinet and place to keep it so that we can get back to it nice and easy. And then I can delete that at any time. So absolutely, we can have subfolders. So yes, excellent. So if I start with our area and actually, I'm going to start at the very top. So I have one file sitting in the very top level folder here of files. And this is an overview of the project that we're working on. And it's really nice to have this document just to kind of set out what the project is, what it's about, what you're trying to achieve. What you may have here is your original research proposal, which has things like your research questions and a bit of background and your purpose of the study and so on, and motivations for the study, just as a bit of a grounding and background for the project. I find if you're working in a research team, having this document is extremely helpful because it helps everyone in the team to kind of be on the same page. So I'm going to open the overview of the sample project. Now keep in mind, I try to double click on the icon rather than the word. I find it's a little more reliable. And being on Teams, NVivo is a little bit slower than it usually would be. I did have it running earlier and I did an update that it asked me to do, and it was much faster. So just keep that in mind that if it's a little bit slow, it's usually not quite that slow. But if you're finding yours is very slow, not okay, let's reach out, let's get that fixed because that's not what we need. And it certainly should not be crashing. So we need to sort that out. There's usually some pretty, there's some troubleshooting we can do to fix that. So this is the overview of a sample project, which is essentially a Word document here in NVivo. It's a text document, and it basically discusses what the project is about. So a couple of things to note here. Firstly is, the first thing that catches my eye is that there's a hyperlink within the text. And so that hyperlink is linked to something outside of NVivo. So rather than having it as a note, or often this might be a sticky note on my page, or maybe I've drawn in the margin, I can link directly from the text here to, for instance, a website. So if I was to do a single left click on the highlighted, on the hyperlink, it shows me how to open the link. So it tells me if I click on Control and click the link, it will open the link into my web browser. Of course, that's opened on a different screen for me. And here we are. It's found it. There we are. So it's not quite the page. Oh, here we go. The Duke University Marine Lab. So rather than having a bookmark in your web browser, I've embedded it within the text of NVivo that then allows me to open up web pages when I need them really easily, and also great for a team as well. Now, how do I create one of those URLs? Well, firstly, remember that edit button. So anytime we open a document, and this is a really good time to refresh on this, anytime we reopen a document, it's going to open in what's called read-only mode. It tells me that here at the bottom of the screen. So if I was to select some text, I'm pressing delete on my keyboard and nothing happens because I'm in read-only mode by default, read-only by default. So I do need to click this edit button. And if you're in version 14, you'll have a little tick box with click to edit over here. But version 15, here's your edit button. Once I click the edit button, then I can actually, for instance, delete the text if I wanted to. So let's say I wanted to embed one of those URLs within the text. I'm going to say highlight some text. And on my right-click menu, I have an option for links and a see also link. And that see also link, oh, sorry, I have a see also link and a hyperlink. A hyperlink is the one that I would like here. So I'm going to do a new hyperlink. Let's say I'm just going to just say there's an ABC News article that I want to link to, for instance, and I'm going to add the URL or copy and paste that from my web browser and click OK. I then get my hyperlink within the text. And now, as we know, if I use Control on my keyboard and click on the link, it will actually open that link for me. Just bring that across from my second screen. And here we are. It opened this link straight for me. So nice and easy to create a hyperlink within the text, which adds a bit of context. See also more information that's outside of my project. But I do need to be in that edit mode first. If I scroll down a little bit further, we'll see, actually, I'm going to go all the way to the bottom first. We'll see some blue highlighting. Does anyone remember what the blue highlighting is for or what it represents? We did cover this one last week. Pop in the chat or unmute yourself if you want to share if you remember what this was for. Can't see anyone typing, so I'll jump in. So the blue highlighting represents, no, that's okay, Emmett, no problems. So this is why we're here with a refresher. So the blue highlighting refers to an annotation. So if I think I have a hard copy paper or interview, and I put a yellow sticky note on it, the yellow sticky note is my annotation. It's like my note to self. Often they're quite temporary, and I want to document them so that I remember things, for instance. So anytime I see, when I create an annotation, it will highlight the text in blue. And so now I've come back to the project, I can see some blue highlighting. So I want to know what the annotation is. So if I go to my view option here on the tiny ribbon, so the context ribbon I have, if I go to view, I have an option for annotations. And what will happen is my annotations will appear at the bottom of the page. And I can turn them on or off at any time. And the reason being, I don't always want them on when I'm coding because they, the notes can be a little distracting, kind of like I put my yellow sticky note to the side. But what this shows me, if I click on item 1, it goes and points to that item in the text. You see it changed color, and it's telling me that these are the notes, my yellow sticky note related to that piece of text. I can add another annotation at any time. So for instance, I wanted to talk about the hotly contested. Maybe there's something happening here. Maybe there's a news article or more. I'm not quite sure what that means. So let's highlight a piece of text. And usually I'll do it on the right click menu. I find that's just nice and easy. I pop in to do a new annotation. It gives me a footnote at the bottom of the page. And now I can make a note going, tell me more about this, for instance. As I said, anytime you create an annotation, it highlights the text in blue when I click off of it. And that highlighting will stay there even through my coding as well. So if I code something that has an annotation, the annotation and color will come through and the notes as well. What you may not have noticed is my annotations renumbered themselves when I added this one, because this one now appears first in the document, which is why it comes first here, before this one here. And of course, if I want to get rid of an annotation at any time, I can right click and simply delete that one. Or I can edit it at any time. So annotations are a great way of, I just need to make a note about this. How do I do it? Let's do an annotation. The other kind of link we have here is a pink link, and we haven't talked about the pink coloring yet. The pink coloring represents what we call a see also link. So it's saying, see also something else in my project. So see another file or a piece of coding or something else in my project. I personally don't use see also links very often, almost not at all, to be honest, but some people use them a lot. So it is important that we cover it. And so once more, if I go to this view option, I can turn my annotations off or I can leave them on. And then I can make my see also links either visible or not visible by choosing the tick here. They again appear like footnotes at the bottom of the page. So if I was to choose item 1 here, it will highlight that text in the document because it says these notes are connected to that piece of text. So when I create the see also link, then it shows me what the links are below. And so this one is saying it's from this document, which makes sense, to a folder and to an item. So if I double click on the see also link here, item number 1, it will then open what it's linked to. So again, it's kind of like that idea I mentioned earlier where you might have, for instance, data pasted on the wall and you have a string between different parts of it to make connections between items. That's almost what a see also link is. It's saying, well, I have this here, but see also something over here that's related. So this particular example, in the text, they're talking about Carteret County has 13 different residential communities. And the link then links to an image that shows the 13 different communities. So it's really just sort of evidence or backup of what's being said in that document. One interesting thing here is that they have multiple see also links. They have actually 3 of them that are linked to exactly the same piece of text. So it's a little different to the memos that have a one-to-one relationship. A see also link can be a one-to-many relationship. So from one document, we can have many see also links. So once more, and really these are 3 different maps of the 13 different residential communities. So the different topologies of maps. So here's just a different version of that. But it's saying the pink is telling me, see also something else in my project that is related. Excellent. So any questions on any of that so far? So 3 links we've now just covered, our URL, our hyperlink, our annotation, and our see also link. Ways of documenting our thoughts as we work through the data. Any questions, let me know. Okay, let's pop down to our area and township. One item we did work a little bit with last week was the competing water users photo. So knowing we can bring images into NVivo can be really, really helpful. So I'm going to open the competing water users photo and have a look at what we have. Noting that we can't edit the image here, but we can tag it and we can code it. So what we did last week was we went into edit mode. We selected a portion of the image. We right-clicked and inserted a row. I haven't clicked to edit, and that's why that's grayed out. And then we made some notes over here. And then we went and coded those notes. So on the other side of that, this is what it would look like in a project. For instance, if I click on row number 1, it's going to highlight that portion of the image and then the notes are attached. So those notes are related, which are the large waterfront homes, which refers to that portion of the image. Similarly, with row number 2, it points to a different portion of the image. And row 3, same idea. Now, these portions have been coded as well. So, and one way of checking what is the coding. So essentially, we're creating a transcript of the image first, and then we go and code the notes linked to the portion of the image, much like we would code an interview, like a Word document. So I'm just going to close this for a moment because I think we're okay with that. But any questions on the photo or the image, let me know. But I want to start talking about some of the numbers we're seeing here. Again, remembering today is about I've done my coding. Where do I go next? So let's assume you've done 80% of your coding. Now, there might be a little bit more that we do as we go, but you want to have done the majority of the coding before we start to do the things that we're doing today from here on out. So the numbers can be really useful to point me to the patterns in the data and the decisions that I've made. And we certainly don't want to quantify the qualitative data, but numbers can be super helpful for us to understand what's going on. And that's really, it's about that pattern, the patterns. So if we start to look at some of these numbers, I can see here that the competing water uses photo has been coded 14 times to 5 different codes. So there are those 3 pieces of text connected to the image, and those 3 instances essentially have been coded 14 times to 5 different topics, is what that's telling me. So if I would like just a quick summary of what those 5 codes are, I'm going to right click on competing water uses, and I have an option to visualize. And I think we did this at the very beginning last week, but great to refresh it here. So if we want to visualize, I'm going to choose the second option. And the second option is to chart the picture coding. And what that means is going to chart those 5 codes for me and what the competing water uses photo is about. And this can be done at any time, but particularly useful once you've done your coding, because then it kind of shows you an overall summary of what's going on. Give it a moment to open. It's going to say no for the moment, but we will save it in a moment. So what this is telling me, these are the 5 codes here, the number 5, that the competing water uses image, which is here, have been coded to. So I can see that 47% of the image is coded to the economy, a little bit less to jobs and cost of living, a little bit less to fishing and agriculture, a bit less to real estate, and a little bit less to tourism. But essentially, these are the 5 codes that represent those 14 coding references. So I really love these because I think they just give you a nice quick summary of what's going on and what do the numbers mean. As always, and I believe I did mention this last week, I always ask myself, is this what I expect to see? If so, great, explain. If not, why not? Explain. These, of course, are live data. So if I wanted to see what was coded to real estate development from the competing water uses image, I can double click on the cell there, and it will take me to the data behind it. Give it a sec to catch up with us. Okay, so it takes me straight to the text, excuse me, related to the image. And so here it's the large waterfront homes. And if I pop down to the picture tab here, it will show me and find the picture we're talking about, which is the competing water uses. It will highlight it there for me as well. And as we know, we saw those notes there. That's what was coded. So the thing I love about NVivo and what NVivo actually means is it means connection. It means relationships. And so once I've coded the data and I'm looking even at the numbers, I can link all the way back to where that came from, which is something we can't do in Excel and we can't do manually. So that's a really useful thing for us to do. Excellent. So a little bit of a refresher on what we did last week there with an added bonus. I'm going to now come down to the interviews folder and have a look at some of our numbers here. Again, the numbers are super helpful. Remembering that I've done my coding, what do I do next? And if I haven't finished my coding, these numbers won't really make a lot of sense, or they're not complete, right? We want them to be as complete as possible. Now, you want to feel like you've done an okay job of coding. Now, I don't say a good job of coding because I don't know what a good job of coding looks like. But excuse me. But you want to feel that you have done an adequate job, that you've covered all the things you need to cover in your coding, and that you feel semi-confident with where things have landed. If you're not there, then this probably isn't useful, this exercise. So you want to get that as far as progressed as possible so that then we can go and actually use these numbers and use the patterns and understand them in terms of what's going on. So I'm going to start by having a quick look at Barbara here. And these are the same people we worked with a little bit last week. So I have Barbara's interview here, and I can tell it's an interview, like it's a transcript, because if I mouse over the item here, it tells me it's a document. Now we'll have a quick refresher of our Barbara interview, and it's an archetype for the other interviews. in that we have a general overview at the top. We have topics, I mentioned, rather than questions, and then we have topics and then questions. Each interview has 6 to 8 topics. It's question 2 with a number of questions beneath them and responses. And that's similar for all of the interviews we have here. Now, I just wanted to point out a couple of different data types that we have here. So that's Barbara, and that's an interview transcript that's been transcribed outside of NVivo. So it's been transcribed, let's say, by Otter. I've been actually playing quite a lot with Otter in the last week, and it does a pretty good job of transcription, depending on accents and sound and background noise and things like that. But if you have them good, then Otter does a pretty good job. Keeping in mind, you still have to go back and fix them. You may, however, instead, as I mentioned, transcribe directly in NVivo manually, which honestly, I think that's the best way of doing things. Like I'm putting things in Otter that are, videos I've created that I'm doing transcripts of. They're not actual, it's not actual interviews and things. I've had this conversation last week with a professor friend of mine going, well, why don't you just put the data into some kind of AI and ask questions of it? Well, really, firstly, transparency and repeatability as key tenets of qualitative research. We need to show our process. And if you're using some kind of AI, they're black boxes and they don't actually give you the same response every time you ask the same question. They'll give you a slightly different response each time. So it's really hard to repeat what they've done and why they've done it. Well, you have no idea why they've done it, but how they've done it as well. And that's something you do need to show in doing qualitative research. So yeah, others have to be able to repeat what you've done and come up with similar outcomes. And this is why coming back and sitting with the data, making sense of it, creating meaning and coding that really still wins out. There's no shortcut to that in doing that well. And in a world of AI, there's actually never been more of a need to do exactly that. What I have here is I have Helen's interview, and you can see from the icon, it's an audio interview. So I mentioned you can transcribe directly in NVivo if you would like. And the nice thing about doing that is that you're listening to the audio and you're typing as you go. And NVivo puts the time spans in for you. So for instance, if I wanted to hear what Helen said when she was talking about the developers with good vision, I can come back and play just that portion of the audio file. It's quite quiet, but you can hear that it is talking its way through there. So the data that you type is connected directly to the audio, and that really does show that transparency of what you heard and then the notes you made. These notes may be what you type verbatim. Then I can add extra columns in to have my own notes next to that. So I think this is a great way of doing things. But keeping in mind, so the Barbara interview is a straight Word document, and Helen here is like a timeline. So they're slightly different versions of the same thing. So let's have a look at, again, okay, one more option here I should mention is we have Betty and Paul, and Betty and Paul is a video file. So video is exactly the same as audio, like the Helen file. The only difference is that it has a moving image with it. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. So we have different data types here, even in the interview files. So I'm going to give you a little bit of pop quiz in a moment, but certainly if we look at Barbara and the numbers we have here. So we can see that Barbara has 197 references to 43 codes. So what that translation means is that Barbara's interview has been coded 197 instances to 48 different places. So it's been highlighted 197 times and organized into 43 different categories. That's quite different to Betty and Paul, who has 41 coding references to 13 codes. So that tells me it's about about a quarter of the coding to Betty and Paul, as opposed to Barbara. That's again quite different if we look at someone like William, who has 106 references to 47 codes. So quite different again. So I wanted to throw it out there to you either on the chat or on the unmute yourself. But I know you know nothing at all about the data, but let's assume you're coming to the data and you're coding, and this is how your coding ends up, the numbers that look like this. As I said, we always ask, is this what I expect to see? So could you account, just going by numbers alone, could you give me any reason why Barbara is coded 197 times as opposed to Betty and Paul to be 41 times? Any thoughts on why they could be so different? If assuming we followed the same process in the coding or a similar process in the coding. Love to hear your ideas. If not, I'll jump in. I'll give you a moment though. There's about 10 different reasons why this could be the case. And this is the first thing that I do when I would look at anyone's project. I look at their coding and I look at the numbers. And I ask questions about the numbers because the numbers point to the decisions that you've made in the data. Again, I've done my coding. Now, what do the numbers mean? Love that, Christine. Depth of response. Absolutely. It may be that Barbara went deep and talked about all the important issues. So I coded all of those things. Whereas Betty and Paul maybe only touched on a couple of issues. Absolutely. It could be in terms of length as well. Barbara's interview may be far longer than Betty and Paul's. So absolutely. Thank you for that. You're spot on. Yeah, absolutely. Deeper questions, then more conversation. And we're going with that. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Any other reasons? Again, there's no wrong answers here. Could it have something to do with the fact that Barbara is a Word document and Betty and Paul is a video? Possibly. So Betty and Paul's interview, if you have a look, so Barbara has been transcribed verbatim, meaning every word has been transcribed. Betty and Paul, however, has actually been transcribed only briefly, and it's more of a summary of what they said. So therefore, that could make a difference in terms of the coding. Now, I'm not going to say whether that's right or wrong. Generally, if you're doing a research degree, you have to transcribe everything verbatim. But beyond that, you may have a project where you actually don't need to do that. So that could actually account for the difference in coding. Any other thoughts on why the numbers could be different? I'll give you a moment to have a think about that. Can't see any activity on the chat, so I'll jump in. So it could be that they both had different interviewers. So they've asked questions differently, and that could influence the coding. It could be they've had different coders. So Barbara was coded by one person and Betty and Paul by a different person, and they've coded differently and had different rules for that. So, and not had a code book. So that could account for the differences as well. It could be that Barbara was the first interview we coded and Betty and Paul was the last one. So therefore, when we coded, we were very excited in the beginning. We coded everything we could possibly think of. By the time we got to Betty and Paul, we're like, yeah, we don't need to do all of that. So that could account for the differences in coding. Any other thoughts? So it absolutely could be that Barbara talked about, yes, she might have talked about a lot, but we may have coded a lot. So we've coded for everything. So yeah, having rules around coding so that we're consistent between the different documents is actually really important. So there's lots of reasons why those numbers could be different. And again, I would ask, is this what you expect to see? And if I asked you this, your response to Betty and Paul would be, oh, yes, the interview was much, much shorter than Barbara. Therefore, we have a lot less coding. Or Betty and Paul only talked on a couple of topics where Barbara talked about everything. Or Betty and Paul was coded last, therefore there's less coding. It could be that case. So again, I just would like to have an answer from you in terms of why things are different. And that helps me to, I'm not saying it's wrong, but okay, so give you an example. I have a PhD student at the moment, and she said that she has interviewed, let's say, 15 people. And 2 of the people were spot on, like literally can write everything about those from those 2 interviews because they were so informative. The other 13, not so much. They kind of were off topic. They talked about different things. They weren't coded to the codes that she had. And her question was, what do I do with them? Now, that's a whole nother conversation and one that we did discuss at length. Not saying that they're not useful, but sometimes, so again, I would just want to know what the reason is behind the coding that you're seeing, but that we're seeing here. So give me a reason. The other thing I can do here is, let's say, that visualization option. So if I right click on Betty and Paul, I have an option to go to visualize and chart the video coding. Because what I want to do here is I just want to see what are those 13 codes? What do they represent? So visualize and chart the video coding. And here I can see the 13 codes that are related to Betty and Paul, and I can start to just make some sense of that. So I can see that more than 90% of Betty and Paul's interview is coded to the economy and also to jobs and cost of living. So immediately that tells me what Betty and Paul care about. They care about jobs and cost of living. A little bit less to natural environment. We have a case code for Betty, which we'll talk about in a moment, and water quality, habitat, balance, and others. A little bit less down here. So again, is this what I expect to see? Great. So those numbers are super, super helpful for us to just say, let's take stock here once I've coded, and are they what I expect them to be? And have I missed something? It's easy to miss things as well. Go, actually, there should be far more coding for Betty and Paul. What have I missed? I need to go back and check that, because I actually think there should be a lot more than that. Or I know they talked about certain topics that don't come up in that visualization. I am going to save it for now. Remember, it reminds us to save every 15 minutes, or I can press Control S on my keyboard to save at any time as well. Excellent. So hopefully we're feeling okay with that list. Now, just to note here, there's a little icon next to Ken, and that represents a memo that's linked to Ken. So we talked about memos last week. We had a research diary as one memo. I suggested we create a memo for every interview that we have. And here we only have one for Ken, but I would actually have a link for every single interview here. I would expect one for every one of them, which gives me a summary of that interview. Let's say what happened in the interview, anything methodologically, like Barbara was late, she's had a fight with her boss, and she really didn't want to answer my questions. I would also document in that memo the 5 things I learned from that interview that I didn't know before. And this was my recommendation to the student who has the interviews where 2 of them are really very insightful and 13 not so useful. She was like, how do I represent that to my examiners? And my response was, as an examiner, I would want to know why those other 13 didn't talk about the things you asked them. What is it about that? Anyway, it's quite a political project. Like, there's a lot of politics underlying the questions and responses. And so they told her things they wanted her to hear because they wanted a voice and they didn't have a voice anywhere else. And they didn't necessarily answer the questions, but it doesn't mean they're unimportant. So my question is, why did they tell you that? And why did they answer the questions?
Down east. That's their wrong. That's where I always grew up. And
oh, I think that's me in the background. I think someone's playing that in the background. No problems. I'm like, what's that? I think that's, I believe that is Ken. I have heard Ken's voice before. So excellent, excellent. So yes, I would have basically I would have a memo for every single one of these. And to open that memo, I can right click here and I come down to memo link and open one that's already there. Or if I don't already have it, I can right click on Barbara and go to memo link and link to a new memo. So I would do that for every single. So if you've done your data collection and you don't have memos for each, I would say that's your first bit of homework, to go through and create a memo for every single one of them. Super, super, super helpful for many, many reasons. Kind of gets it out of your head. It documents your thoughts. You can then put that in an appendix in your dissertation and then share it with your examiners so they can keep track of all of your people as well. So very, very helpful. Awesome. So I just want to check. We're going to have a break in about 5 minutes. So, and I know maybe a lot to start with, but I just want to check if there's any questions around those interviews there and the numbers. We're going to talk more about numbers. Can't see anything in the chat, so I'm going to pop down to my codes. So the nice thing about the sample project that we have here is, as I said, it's a grown-up project. So there's a bunch of data here already coded, so we can see what does it look like when someone has coded all of their data, which can be super helpful. This looks like a really nice manageable coding scheme. I can see, a dozen codes on the screen at the moment. But in reality, there's 36 codes here that are nested underneath in a hierarchy. At any time, if I want to see all of them on the screen, rather than clicking on every plus sign here, which does take a bit of time sometimes, this can be a little bit painful, we can right click here in the white space and expand or collapse. So if we expand all the codes, they all open up. And then what I would do is I would right click and print this screen and have a list of all my codes next to me printed out as I'm coding, because I find that's a little bit easier to code that way. Then at any time, I can actually collapse them all and bring them back all together. There's 36 of them there in total. Somebody should be able to work out what your research questions are by looking at your list of codes. So if I come to this project, I can see that people are interested in attitudes, positive and negative, for instance, about the economy, around infrastructure, around natural environment, policies, and sense of community. So I should be able to tell that really quickly when I look at your project. Yep, visualize all the codes from the interviews. If I pop back again, so Christine, so you can do, one way to do it is from here, from the interviews. So if I right click on one of my interviewees, let's say Helen, and I do that visualization. So I right click and I visualize. It's just really hot. Yeah. Visualize, and I do that chart the coding. And that's one way of visualizing all the codes from the interviews. So I think that answers your question. That's how you visualize the codes from the interviews. If I've missed something there, please let me know. Oops. So just continuing on here. So thank you for your question. Let's start to look at some of the numbers we have here. Again, there's a lot going on here. I'm going to break that down a little bit further. I'm just going to come back to our natural environment. So we'll have a code book which defines each of our codes, which is really important for us. And again, you can have nested codes. I wouldn't go down any more than 4 levels though, because I find you get a little bit lost. And what we want is we want to say, like, is agriculture a sort of economy? Yes, it is, and therefore it's in the right place. Is fishing a sort of economy? Yes, it is, and therefore it's in the right place. A note here, if you start to find that you have duplicate codes, that's when you're going to find yourself in a bit of a mess. So we certainly don't want under positive. We don't want to have agriculture, fishing, jobs and tourism under positive, and also under negative, because that's when we're going to duplicate things and we get really, really messy. So that's not going to work out for us. So there's ways of setting this up in terms of making it as efficient. So if you're finding that, let's check in and let's fix that so that's not the case. If we start to look at some of the numbers here, I can see that in terms of negative codes, we have 499, and there are 421 positive codes. So what that tells me is that people aren't overwhelmingly unhappy or happy about a particular topic. So I probably need to investigate further. But one really nice, useful visualization we can use here is we can compare 2 codes together. We can compare 2 documents, 2 codes, or 2 cases. So if I just want to compare now, it's going to look a bit messy to start with, but bear with me. So I've selected 2 codes, and I'm going to right click and visualize and use the compare feature. So I'm going to compare what's coded to negative, what's coded to positive, and what's similar. So like I said, it's quite ugly. It's quite big, but I'm going to then zoom in. What this tells me is all of these cases on the left-hand side have said positive things only and not negative things. All of these on the right-hand side have said only negative things, but no positive things. But then all of those in the middle have said both positive and negative things. Now, this is survey data and interview data mixed in together, and that's why there's a lot of it. You might have a survey with 10,000 responses, then it's going to get very, very messy. But there's a method to the messiness. So the compare tool is a really useful visualization to say what's coded to just one of either of these codes, and then what's coded to both. So the ones in the middle, it means that they've had positive and negative comments at different times in the interview, probably not at the same time. But it could be quite useful to go, well, who was only positive and who was only negative? And then what did they say as a pattern in the data? We can do that same visualization with a, sorry, I missed your question there. So thank you, Ru. Filter function, it does when we get to the matrices, not so much in doing the visualizations, but certainly when we get to the matrices. And we can have visualizations come off the matrices, which we can have a bit more control over. So excellent question. Can you visualize participant codes for comparison? Yes, so I think I've just showed that. So yeah, absolutely. So, well, I'm about to show that. So if I come back here and go, okay, well, let's see, what did Barbara say as opposed to Betty and Paul? Their code numbers are quite different, but did they talk about the same topics? So for instance, the 13 codes that Betty and Paul are coded to, are they the same codes as Barbara? So I'm hoping that's your question there, Christine, and Rue as well. So the same feature applies here. So I have an option to right click and visualize, and I'm going to compare the two. I can only compare two. So let's compare the coding on Barbara's interview as opposed to Betty and Paul's. Looks a little bit different this time. I'm going to zoom in. So what I can see is that actually, so these are cases over here, which we're going to talk about in the next session, like after the break. What I can see is everything that Betty and Paul talked about, Barbara also talked about. So there's a lot of things that Barbara talked about that Betty and Paul didn't, but there's nothing that Betty and Paul talked about that Barbara didn't. Okay, so hopefully you can sort of see that. So Barbara, they're all the things she talked about on the left and in the middle. Betty and Paul, all the things they talked about in the middle, but there's nothing on the right because there's nothing else they talked about that Barbara didn't. So for me, that's a really useful insight to the data. Any questions on that, please let me know. Oops. It's doing some funny things. Here we go. Okay, so I think it's time to have a little break. Let's take 10 minutes and I'll pop a timer on for us. So if we think about that recap of let's get the data in, let's understand some of the numbers, let's get to know the data, let's see the decisions that we've made. Because often we've spent 3 months coding and now we go, what's going on? We come back and check and go, what's happening here? So we're going to come back and we're going to work more through the codes and ask some more questions of the numbers there and explore them. But knowing that what you do will take you to a certain point, and then that point will take you that next step forward. So any questions on what we've covered so far this morning, please let me know. And I'll pop the timer on. Short break. Here we go. Okay, so let's just take 10 minutes and I will see you back very soon. Any questions, pop them in the chat for me. Okay, let's jump into round 2 for today. Okay, let's have another look at our codes and some of these numbers. So I'm going to pop down to our economy codes here. And we have 4 economy codes. And what the economy codes, so we've 4 of them, and there's some subcodes there. So we always want to ask the question, like, is this child code, subcode, an instance of the one above? So these are all elements of the economy, and therefore they fit under the economy. If I click on the under fishing or aquaculture, and then even down further, the under fishing industry decline, these are all reasons for the fishing industry decline. Back up one level, let's start to look at some of the numbers here across these 4. Now, I know this isn't your data, so it does make it a little bit challenging to understand, but hopefully you can apply these same techniques when you are looking at the numbers in your data. So if we first look at agriculture, we can see there are 20 coding references to 8 codes. That's actually quite different to 367 coding references to 19 codes. And it's also quite different to, say, tourism, where there are 12 codes to 7 files. So again, is this what I expect to see? Like, would I expect them to be kind of equal or not? Again, an answer to this may be that phishing was actually the core of what we were looking at, and therefore that's what we coded the most about. And the other issues kind of came up as periphery and weren't the main point, or they weren't as important, or they just didn't get talked about as much. And then I would ask, why didn't they get talked about as much? So understanding those numbers can help us to interpret what's going on. So yes, coding is one step. The next step is actually making sense of what we've done in the coding and what does it actually mean. And have I missed something? Or is this in line with the way I would expect people to have expressed themselves or not? And then let's explore that further. Let's come on down to our natural environment codes. So I've got a number of them here. 7 natural environment codes. Again, these are all elements of the natural environment. Again, the numbers are quite different. If I look at, for instance, ecosystem services, there's 13 codes to 9 files, which is quite different to water quality, which is 147 codes to 13 files. So that's quite different. And so again, I would ask, why is there more coding at water quality and less at ecosystem services? Again, it might be that people, water quality is part of the research question. Therefore, it was really what a lot of people talked about and we asked them about. Therefore, it's coded there. And maybe renewable energy was just something that came up along the way. I can see there's only one file that's coded to. If I was to double click and delve into that, I would find that renewable energy was actually only mentioned or only coded from the social media data. Therefore, there's one file there, but that represents multiple people. So I guess the 15 codes are probably 15 different people, potentially. But understanding what those numbers mean and are they what I expect them to see. So another nice visualization that you can use here, I want to see how these child codes are kind of nested within the natural environment and how do they fit together. So one of the visualization options I have, if I click on natural environment and my right click, I can come down and choose a hierarchy chart of the intersecting codes. Actually, I don't think that's the one that I want. I think I chose the wrong one. Yes, I chose, no, actually, that's not the one I wanted. What that's showing me is what's also coded at natural environment, but that's not quite the one that I want. Let me go back 1 second. Apologies. Sometimes we play around a little bit. Let's go down and find the one under visualize. Okay, hierarchy chart of codes is the one that I wanted. So it tells me within the natural environment code, here are each of my children codes and how much they are represented like in comparison to each other. So I can see the water quality code. If I mouse over it, there are 147 references, which is exactly the same number as here, and 13 codes. 13 files. And that's so the most of the coding is there, as opposed to habitat, environmental change, landscape, and the others that we have here. So sometimes it's just useful to have that visual of how the categories or concepts are represented within the parent category. And of course, I can export that out and save that as well. So the main thing here is a couple of lessons here. We don't want to duplicate codes. We want to ask if the children codes are actually instances of the parent code. So again, if we go to attitude, is positive a kind of attitude? Yes. If I had community change under here, is community change a kind of attitude? No, it's not. And therefore, it's telling me it's not in the best place. So I'd move it out. And as we know, we can move codes around. So if I decided that, let's just take an example, neutral, probably not a great example, but let's say neutral shouldn't be an attitude. I can cut that, come down here to the white space and paste it. And therefore, we can move our codes around. Nice and easy. And if I want to pop them back, I just Control Z and I'll pop back. I can undo. So that's a little exploration of our codes and asking questions of your code, which I think is a really, really important thing for us to do. So I'll just stop there for a moment and ask if there's any questions on organizing and rearranging our codes. So let me know. Feel free to unmute as well. Okay. So one of the types of coding that we can do also is around sentiment. And so sentiment is, dare I say, a bit of a quick and dirty review of your data to separate and organize it into, what would that be? Just expand all of these. And it automatically organizes your data into what is very positive versus moderately positive versus what's moderately negative and very negative. So for instance, if I went back to my interviews, for instance, I could select them all with a little Control A on my keyboard. And I have an option here to auto code. And one of my auto code options is to code by sentiment and organize the positive versus negative comments essentially. Now, I would say this does it about 80% correct, not 100%. That's just because of the nature. Like I've literally sat with two other professors looking at the same piece of data. Two of us thought it meant one thing and one of us thought it meant something else. So if humans can't get that right, it's very difficult for computers to get that 100% right, but it's pretty good. And particularly if you were to do this with literature or survey data, it's a little more accurate than interview data because often interview data, people say the opposite of what they mean. So it does make it a little bit harder. But for example's sake, let's say we've got all of our interviews and we're going to auto code. And we have an option to code by sentiment. And next. Sure. So this is an AI feature, so I do need to go. It's funny though, because we've had the sentiment coding for many years in NVivo, but now I've gone into my artificial intelligence terms of use, which you know we saw last week. I can't bother showing it on my other screen. I won't show you again, but let's go. Okay. I'm going to code paragraphs because I think that's a little more useful than sentences. Sorry, next. Paragraphs, and let's finish that up. So you can see the progress bar at the bottom of the screen. It's going through very quickly and organizing the data according to certain keywords. So it finds words, which you'll see in a moment, which it then classifies as either positive or negative. Again, this is really useful. And so let's say we have 10,000 surveys. We want to just understand what's the sentiment around a certain topic. We can run this on the open-ended response for a survey. As we ended our workshop last week, we looked at those open-ended responses. And we can say, okay, well, when people talk about the things they'd like to see or not like to see, what's positive and negative, or generally what the water quality is like. Okay, so it gives us a nice summary of each interview per se. And we can see that there's nothing, I actually don't find this particularly useful, that they're quite neutral, nothing really obvious there. So I'm going to close those. But where I'd like to draw your attention is if we come down to our sentiment here, we can now see that all the coding has been performed. Again, it's an auto code, so we just take it with a grain of salt. It's not 100% correct, but it may be useful to save us a little bit of time and to look at some insights. Again, in survey data, you've got short responses. People are really quite specific, as opposed to interviews where people talk a lot generally. So it's harder to do this on interviews and be accurate than it is on survey data. What it shows me is that there are 72 positive comments and 34 negative comments. So it's just showing that people are generally more positive than they are negative. Now I think I can't do a compare on those, unfortunately. So if I want to see what comments were positive overall, I can double click and it will take me to them. And then what I could do from there is I could code from the positive code. For instance, I could go through and code from here a little bit further. So just different ways of looking at the data. And that's what we do in data analysis. We kind of slice it and dice it in lots of ways to see what the patterns are, if there's any obvious pattern there. You can see there's only one very negative comment here that is picked up. So let's go and have a look. Again, it's looking at keywords. So it's saying, yeah, again, it's not really obvious why that's very negative, to be really honest. So yeah, we take it, we look at it, and we make sense of it. But it's maybe a little shortcut for us. But essentially, that's our coding process. We know that the coding scheme is a work in progress. It can be changed at any time. We know that if we want to change the name of a code, for instance, we can right click on it and go to the code properties down here. So we can maybe have a description and a name. We can change the name at any time. I'm sure someone's going to ask me about the colors at some point. So the colors have been allocated to the codes. You'll see the attitude codes are red. The environment codes are blue. I think the economy nodes are green. That's what someone chose to do. I personally don't use colors very much, but some people really like them. For instance, if we look at the interviews, they've also been color coded. It's really just a matter of right clicking on it and either going to the properties, or down here we can change the color. One way I like to use the colors is, let's say select all of my interviews, and at the beginning, do that up top here, I'm going to color them. Let's color them all red to start with. And as I code them, I'm going to make them green. Or I might make the females pink, very stereotypical, and the males blue, or whatever signpost is helpful for you with that color coding. So hopefully we're feeling good with that. Now, the other thing, we talked about memos earlier. I would have a memo for every single one of your codes. Now, there's only balance is the only one that has a memo here from this icon, but I would have a memo for every single code. So as you're working through, you're reading what they're saying about community change, for instance. As I'm reading it, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a memo and link to a new memo. I'm going to call it notes about community change. Actually, I'm going to probably, just for the way it's going to appear in the order, I'm going to call it community change summary. And okay. So what happens, it then links a memo to that code. Now I can make some notes about that interview. Oh, sorry, about that code. So I mentioned I always insert my date and time anytime I'm working in a memo. And I'm going to make some notes saying this Wednesday talk about community change. They mention X, Y, Z, and so on. And this can be a working document I have as I'm working through a code. So I have my code open and I have my memo open. I mentioned if we have any kind of window, we can actually undock it and pop it on a second screen. So if I was to undock this particular window, it's going to pop it out and I can move it on my second screen, so I can have my community change code open and then my notes about it open at the same time. And I'm going to be writing about it as I go. So yeah, a little bit of homework. If you have got some codes, I would start making memos about each of them. So I'd have a little icon for each of them and be writing about them all. So again, I'll take a moment and just ask if there's any questions about our codes or organizing our codes or what I need to do. There's no right or wrong number of codes, but the more, again, someone should be able to work out your research questions and they should be manageable. And you should have a code book. I mentioned a code book has each code or concept, a definition or description of each of them, and then an example of each of them. And if you find you have too many codes to put in your code book, then you have too many codes. If you're like me, everything is interesting. So we create codes for everything. However, that's not really useful to get us over the line and answer the questions we need to. So this is why having the research questions on the wall in front of us, I'm referring to mine on the wall in front of me, having them there helps me to keep the scope of my research. Scope creep is a big thing. And so let's come back to, what do I need to answer to answer the research questions? Everything else is kind of peripheral. Maybe useful now, maybe useful later. Maybe it's a postdoc in the PhD folder, in the postdoc folder, but certainly just keep on track. What do I need to answer the questions? And this is why I say knowing the endpoint and where I want to get to helps you to define what your codes are and what they look like at this point. So just checking if there's any questions in the chat, or unmute yourself about your codes. Hopefully you're not feeling bad about your codes. I've seen some really, really messy codes. I've kind of seen it all. I've seen big messes. Often it takes me 5 minutes to unscramble your codes and find a way forward. I've had a student where it took me like an hour. I would say their codes were a very, very, very big mess. But we were able to, absolutely were able to fix it. It just took a bit more time. So just thinking about, I think early on, what do you want to know? How can we, what would my highlighter pens be? How can we set things up in a way that allows us to code and answer the questions? And also keep in mind, very importantly, the simultaneous coding. That one piece of text may apply to 5 different places. We code it to 5 different places. Awesome. Any questions? Let me know. Awesome question, Christine. I love it. How do you write about emerging things that were not part of the research question? Okay, so firstly, you may have them listed as codes where you've coded to, but they may not actually answer the research question. So they're kind of like a little bit periphery to the question that you're asking. Doesn't mean they're unimportant. They may come back around, or it may be another project in the future. So again, I think it's having a memo, so coding them, but then having a memo for each of those codes and talking about how they fit or don't fit the research question. I think it's really just in our interpretation and what we write about that. But I think document them, have them there. They came up, this was important, but maybe it just doesn't help to answer the research question that I have right now. You may have a different research question in the future that they will help to answer. Excellent question. Okay, so if we're happy with that, we've done a bit of a recap on our files and our codes, and we know we can move things around. They're definitely a work in progress. Your codes may change right to the end of your coding. In terms of the numbers, those that have the most coding are not always the most important. Those that have the least coding may actually be the most important. Just so often it's, again, what's not being said. So if you see a code that only has, for instance, 4 references, it's like, what's going on there? Why did they say that? How does that add to what we know about the overall topic? So I think that can go either way. So if we're good with that, we're going to pop down to our cases and start to talk about cases. Again, how? Absolutely not. No. No, thank you for your question. So no, you definitely do not need to do that. I think you read the data and you code it as it fits. If it's positive, negative, you code it there. If not, then you just code it wherever it sits. So they're just often when we have a research question, we are looking at what's positive and negative, or the barriers and enablers to something. And therefore we code it to positive and negative, and then also the topic that it's about. But you absolutely don't need to do that. Again, we come back to pen and paper. What would I write in the margin when I'm coding it? And that's what I would do here. So no, there's no prescribed way that you need to do this. Go with what the data says and capture it that way. Whatever that is, capture it that way. So hopefully that helps to answer your question. This is just a sample project. This is how they did it, just so we can see how someone else did it. We all do it slightly differently. I've never had a project that looks quite like this, to be really honest. This is very slick. It's very all together. It often doesn't look like this, but this is kind of a model project that we might work with. And that's the beauty of qualitative research. It's all different every time. And that's what I love. There's no one way of doing things. But hopefully that answers your question. Go, huh? Thank you. Going to go back to this data set that we have, which is what we call in NVivo a classification sheet. Essentially, it's a list of demographics. So what we have here, we looked at this briefly last week, is that we have each of the people in our study. So these are the interviewees. We're not looking at survey data just yet, but each of our interviewees, Barbara, Charles, Dorothy, Helen, Ken, and so on. And there are things about each of them that we know. So we know their gender, we know their age, we know where they live, We know how long they've lived there, and so on. I've decided I'd like to include this data as part of my interviews to help me to look for patterns in the data. So I'm going to look for, is there a difference in how the males versus females talked about a particular topic? Is there a difference in age range? If there's a difference in terms of where they come from, where they live, I should say, is there a difference in how long they've lived there? It makes sense that if people have only lived there for less than 12 months, or less than, I think what we got there. Yep. Less than 0 to 5, less than 5 years, they have a certain perspective versus those who've lived there their whole life. It makes sense that their views will probably be quite different. So again, if we come back to the point of data analysis, is looking for patterns in the data. We use all the tools we can to look for patterns in the data. I know I collected this kind of data for my PhD from my interviewees, and I didn't really understand why I did it at the time. But again, it allowed me to then go and look at, were there patterns based on how their age and their gender and their experience and so on. So sometimes it might be just like, no, none of this tells me anything. Sometimes it might. So one example I can give is I had a client who was looking at climate change, actually probably like 20 years ago. It was quite a long time ago, up in Noosa. And they'd interviewed a bunch of people about climate change, and it was like a board of people on a particular organization. And when they were analyzing the data, they felt that breaking it down by particular ages, like 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, wasn't really helpful. They had a gut feeling that there was something about age in the way people are talking about things, but breaking it down by individually. Again, they're quite arbitrary categories. If we go 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, you know, what does the 30-year-old have in common with a 40-year-old, to be really honest? Probably not a lot in terms of the way they talk, but that's just what we do in research. So those categories are quite arbitrary, but that's what we have. Anyway, so the person had, we were running these queries based on different, like 20, 30, 30, 40, 40, 50, 50, 60, so on, to try to see, was there a pattern there in the way that different cohorts of age groups were talking about something? No. What we did instead, we then, because again, she had this gut feeling. So what we did was we created an extra category, which said over 40 and under 40. And the patterns were really obvious then. Under 40s certainly had a perspective that was very different to the over 40s. And so just using this data to help us to understand what's going on can be really useful. So if you have this kind of data, I'd love you to pop your hand up or pop something in the chat. But it's very useful for us to then bring this into NVivo. In saying that, you may not have this data at all, which is perfectly okay. You don't need to use it. But if you have, we can make the most of it. So if we're going to import this into, if we're going to import this into NVivo, the first thing I need to do is to close the document. Now, a couple of things first. I may have done my first 10 interviews. There's 10 people here. Let's say I've done my first 10 interviews, and I've created this document. I'm going to import this. I can create it directly in NVivo, but it's actually a lot easier to import it from Excel or CSV. Or if you're working with, say, Qualtrics or any other online tool, you can download it and then you can import it. So I'm going to, let's say I've got my first 10. I'm going to import this. Let's say I go and then collect another 10 interviews. I can then re-import this spreadsheet, and it will just simply overlap what we already have in there and add what's new. Just saying, if you've got multiple rounds of data collection. So if I'm going to import this into NVivo, I am going to close it first before I import it, because otherwise it doesn't really like if it's open, or it definitely doesn't like if it's open. I'm just going to start a new project for you, just so that I can show you what this looks like. So I'm just going to say, I'm just going to open a new project. It's called test today. I can show you from the beginning what this looks like, because I've already got one in here, so it'll get a bit messy. So that's why I'm going to show you a new one. So let's just do a new one. It's on its way. So I'd love to know in the chat how many of you have demographic type information of your interviewees. Please let me know. Pop something in the chat or a hand up. Oh, Pima, did you have a question? Please. Sorry, you're on my second screen. I missed you. You got a question?
Sorry, Dr. Jen. So I just want to let you know that I've been removed from the chat. I just want to let you know that.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So just to show you what this looks like when I bring it into a new project, because again, the sample already has one in there, so it's not so useful for the demo. So if I here have a brand new project and you have that kind of demographic data of your interviewees. Excellent, Christine. Thank you so much. We can bring them in. So under the import option, I can't right click. Oh, actually, I probably can right click. Let me just check. No, I can't right click this one. I have to go to the import ribbon. And it's a classification sheet. And I realize NVivo language is a little bit clunky sometimes. And this is one of those examples. So nothing I can do about it, but just so that you're aware of it. So we're going to import a classification sheet, which is essentially that demographic sheet we just looked at. We're going to go and find that. Just sitting here on my desktop, my NVivo sample data. And of course, you'll know exactly where yours is. Oops. Okay. Not much I need to do here. All I need to do is, there's actually one really important step, and otherwise there's nothing else you need to know here in the import, is I do need to change this to be a case classification. So again, you'll have this video when you do this. Like I said, I offer a 10-minute follow-up at the end of our sessions today. So if at some point you'd like to get your case class, your demographics in and you're not sure, happy to jump on a call with you and do it. Usually you only have to do it once. Let's pop that in there. And next. I'm going to leave everything as is and finish. So what happens is it imports that Excel spreadsheet here in NVivo, and it takes everything from that first column and creates that as what's called a case in NVivo, and then it adds what we call attributes to that case. So attributes and attribute values. So attributes are the things we know about the people, and then the attribute values are, whether it's male, female, for instance. So it's taken all of this from our Excel spreadsheet, which is really nice. So what that means is now we can almost now use that to ask questions of the data. The other thing we then need to do is we need to have all of our files in NVivo, and we need to connect the two. So that's important for us to do. So what NVivo has done when I've imported that, cases here. So if we come back to what are cases, cases are units of analysis in our research. So usually our cases are individuals. So let's say we've interviewed 20 individuals, we will have 20 cases. In this case, we've got 10 individuals, we've interviewed 10 people, we have 10 cases. So cases that represent each person. Two reasons why we have cases, or two main reasons why we have cases. One is that if we've interviewed one person, we may have, let's say, 5 different files related to that person. So we want to code those 5 files to that case. So what that means is Barbara's then only represented once. So let's say we have 5 files for Barbara. We code them all to Barbara's case. When we ask questions and run queries, it means that we only represent Barbara once rather than 5 times, which is exactly what we want. So that's one reason why we have cases. The second reason we have cases is so that we can add demographic data. So in reality, a case is a code. So if we think back to what is a code is a place to put like things. And those like things are, in this instance, these things like, let's come back. Actually, I'm in the sample project. Oh, sorry, I'm out of the sample project. But our codes are things like attitudes, their natural environment, their economy, their codes about topics. The case codes are codes about people and places, so they're a little bit different. And they allow us to then bring the data in. And again, this is something we can't do manually. So when we bring this in, we can say, okay, these are the things. And we want to get to a point where when we ask questions, we want to say, what are the differences between females and males? And we want the software to know that, okay, Barbara has 5 documents that are female. And so every time female is mentioned, it references those 5 documents. So that's what cases work for. Now, I should also mention you may have multiple levels of cases. So often we all have individual cases, so individuals in our project, but we also may have, say, an organization. So one example might be is that we've interviewed, let's say, 10 people here who work across 3 different hospitals. So yes, we want to know what the individuals say about a certain topic, but we also want to know what the organization said about a particular topic. So in that case, we would have cases for each individual. So let's say here, I'm going to put boundaries for a second. So it might be that, I'm just going to rearrange these slightly. So I'm going to do a new case and just call it individuals. I'm literally just going to organize all of them and pop them under my individuals. Kind of a bit of a organizing tool. It's a little bit slow. Give me a second to catch up. It's very slow. It's gone to lunch, I think. Okay, let's just say I'm going to take each of these. Put them under my individuals. Just to really organize them, I'm going to put them under individuals. There we go. So I can now look at things at an individual level. And then if I want to look at an organizational level, so let's say Barbara, Charles, and Dorothy work for Hospital A. Ken, Helen, Margaret work for Hospital B. Robert, Susan, Thomas, William work for Hospital C. So we've got 3 different hospitals. So I want to look at an individual level, but also at an organizational level. And by using cases, it allows me to organize the data in a way so I can look at both levels. So if that's the case, I want to create a new case called organization. Let's say hospital. Yeah. And let's say I'm going to create, say, hospital A, hospital B. And I guess this is why knowing the outcome or where I want to get to helps me to define what I do here, because I want to look at what each individual said, but I also want to look at what people said as an organization. And as you know, when we code, we can code data to more than one place. Just pop it in and let's say we've got 3 of them. And so therefore, Barbara's interview may be coded at Barbara as an individual, or will be. It'll also be coded at Hospital A. So let's go back and say I'm going to import all of my interviews. So back to the beginning. Again, I've jumped out of the sample project for a moment just to give you an example. I'm going to go up and let's say I'm going to import all of my interviews. Yes, yes, yes. Give it a moment. You see my progress bar at the bottom working its way. Come on in, Vivo. You're nearly there. Excellent. Okay, so in any project you might work on, we import our classification sheet, and then we have each of our interviews imported. We haven't coded them to topics yet. We're not there. So I've kind of stepped back a little bit. So now let's say we have Barbara. We want to code Barbara to her as an individual case, but also at Hospital A. So we just want to, again, we're just doing an organizing exercise here in making sure that Barbara is organized in the categories where she belongs. So if I right click on Barbara, I'm going to use the code option, the code whole document. Let's just ignore that for now. Confirm. And here I'm going to go and code Barbara at Barbara. Not sure why this is not in alphabetical order, but that's odd. And also at Hospital A. Because Barbara is Barbara. We need her as a case, so we can add demographics about her age, her gender, and so on. And then also Hospital A, just so that we can look at Hospital A versus Hospital B versus Hospital C. and code that one. Excellent. And let's say Betty and Paul, the same. I'm going to go and code Betty and Paul. So Betty and Paul also is related to Hospital A. Code Betty and Paul to Betty and Paul, and then also Hospital A. And so the idea is I'm going to walk through and do that for each of these, and then I can look at what they said at 2 different levels of unit of analysis. So what do we want to know at an individual level, and what do we want to know at a group level? So if I pop back to my sample project for a moment, let's jump out of that. I'm going to save that one. And if you're a little confused at the moment, it's okay. Firstly, it's Saturday and it's this time, and we're about to go to a break very soon. But also, cases are kind of the hardest thing to get your head around in NVIDIA. It takes a bit of a step back, and often we only do it once. So if I pop down here to my cases that I have in my sample project, people. What we have here is we have a case for every single interview participant that I have. Here we are for Barbara. So Barbara has 2 files. It might be Barbara has sent us, some correspondence. She sent us some notes. There's a whole bunch of extra things she sent us. And we want to code everything about Barbara to the case. That's the point, is Barbara has everything about her in one place. Everything about Betty in one place. Everything about Daniel. Everything about Dorothy in one place. So even if there's multiple documents, NVIDIA knows to count them once. That's what's really important. What this ends up looking like when we link all of them together. Let's say if I go here to Barbara and I right click on Barbara and I go down to my case properties. My second tab here essentially has all of my demographics. So if you think, again, it's a little tricky to get your head around, but if we think about here, I have Barbara as an entity, and attached to Barbara, kind of on the outside, are all of the things I know about Barbara. So her age, how long she's lived there, where she lives, and so on. Inside the actual case is all of the qualitative data. So this is kind of the quant data that sits on the outside. And then within Barbara, we have all the qual data. So these are all the things that Barbara said, all the documents that she's given us. So we have that, and then we have this. Now, these are really used. So what's in the actual case, we code it to topic codes, but then we can also ask questions about the categories that she's coded to. So what did those who've lived there for 2 generations say about the topic? What did those who are recreational fishers say about a topic? What did those who are female say about a topic? And every time I then ask a question about something that's female, it knows that I'm talking about Barbara. So it knows to bring out, let's say, 5 documents about Barbara and bring them forward. And so that's kind of cases, and it's kind of good we have a break very soon, because it is a little bit tricky to get your head around how that all works. And if it's not 100% clear right now, it's absolutely okay. And often it takes, half an hour to sit down and actually work out what your cases are. Sometimes really obvious, sometimes not. But for us to sit down and work out what they are, then we can use them to ask questions, which is in our next session for the next hour. But cases, again, are a really useful tool. A couple of questions to ask yourself. Do I have that demographic type data? Would I like to use it in my research? How do I bring it in? How do I organize the data so that then I can ask questions of those categories? And what that then brings us to is our next step, which is our queries, and where we go and ask more questions. So I'll just stop there for a moment. Again, I know that's a lot. I'd love to open it up for questions, and if you have any thoughts or feedback. And don't despair if it's not 100% clear at the moment. Please unmute or pop something in the chat. I've lost you completely. I apologize. Again, you may not have this data. If you don't have demographic data, you may not need to use cases at all. But most people tend to have this kind of data.
Hi, Jenine, it's Christine.
Yes.
Yeah, so my demographic data is part of a bigger survey, and the people that responded to the survey also agreed to be interviewed. So like 20 people from the survey. So if I want to get their demographic data to add to the interview, do I just need to go back to the survey and export? So it's all in Qualtrics. So is that export from Qualtrics to Excel, and then filter those individuals out so that I've got their demographic, and then bring it into NVivo?
Yeah, excellent question, Christine. Thank you so much for your question. It's a really, really great question. So as you say, often we'll interview someone and then they'll also participate in a survey. So it's same people, same case, essentially. And then we have data about them from the survey that we may like to attach to them as a person, which also then reflects what they said in the interview. So 100% agree with that. So Barbara is an excellent example of that. So there has been a survey that's been done and imported here into NVivo. So Barbara has been surveyed and interviewed. And if I double click on Barbara, I can see how that plays out. Give me 1 second to just open up Barbara. So excellent question that you have there. Yes, we can. Often, I guess the challenge is often when we survey people, we don't know who they are. It's anonymous. So we can't connect what they said in the survey to what they said in the interview. So that's like 95% of the time, that seems to be the case. If you are in a position where you can identify who the people in the survey are and what they said and link it to what to the interviewees, great. And so here we have what Barbara has said all through her interview, but then here are some responses, open-ended responses from her survey. So they've absolutely been linked together. So yes, it's possible. Happy to jump on a call 10 minutes and sort that out with you. Yes, so may I ask with your survey participants, so you do know who said what? Is it anonymous or not anonymous?
So it's partly anonymous. However, those who agreed to be interviewed provided a name and email contact, so I can find them in the survey.
100%. So in that case, we would actually link it through a case, what they said in the interview data to what they said in the survey data, exactly like Barbara has here, 100%. And so if I then go and just find Barbara and right click on Barbara. So then the demographic data I have for Barbara will be some of that stuff I have in the Excel spreadsheet, but it'll also be the things that we have from the survey data, which may be a little bit extra. So yes, absolutely, we can bring them together. And that's the real value of doing mixed method research, that we can bring them both together. Yes. 100%. Excellent question. And again, there's a little bit to that, just in terms of looking at your data and making sure it's where it needs to be. Like I said, I'm happy to jump on a 10-minute call of no cost and just organize that so that they all line up together. So really excellent question. But
thanks, I would love that.
100% happy to do that. And excellent, excellent question. Rusim, I think so. I just saw your question there around the, I was a little bit slow in scrolling down, so I believe that you will get access to the recordings. So Emmett, okay, so love your question, because that's where we're going to go in our next 1 hour. So thank you so much for your question. So what do we do with it? And that's where we go next. So I'm going to take a little break now, because I think we all need a little bit of time, 10 minutes away from the screen. Then we're going to come back and we're going to go through all the queries on how we use this data. So I love your question. That's an excellent question. And again, a lot of it is how we set the project up. So you may spend 3 months setting the project up and doing your coding. And then you may spend 3 months actually asking questions and running queries on the data. That's not uncommon to do that. So it's kind of, let's set the data up. Then what questions do we want to ask? But knowing what questions you want to ask leads to how we set the project up. So they're kind of interrelated. But I love your question. It's perfectly on time and exactly what we're going to explore with all of the queries in the next hour of our work. So thank you so much. So again, I know this is a lot, and I know, and it depends on where you are at. And I love, Christine, your comment, because that explains where you're at right now. You may not be here right yet, but knowing where you can go with your work is very helpful. Awesome. I love your feedback. I love your questions. So I am going to pop us on a break for just 10 minutes. Let's get a bit of away screen time if you can. Let's not read email in the middle. And we'll come back and we'll work through all of our queries, which are super exciting. Thank you, everyone. Awesome. Let's jump back in and get going. So just checking your questions here. We've got a few questions. So Emmett, yes, we're going to answer all your questions now about how to make the most of it. Nah, finish the coding in the first step. Current, want to code further based on the okay. How to connect the former code with the current coding. Hopefully what I'm about to show you will make sense. Going how, thank you. Yeah, really great question about the focus group. So I think has a similar question about the focus group. So let me just double check. Yeah, excellent question. So if we look at a focus group example where you have multiple people, and this is kind of what we have. Let me just go back and have a look at, say, my interviews. I'm going to open up my Betty and Paul interview here. We can kind of assume Betty and Paul is kind of like a focus group where you have multiple people talking. Probably you have more than 2 people. What we're going to do is, yes, if you want to add the demographic information, you do need to code them separately. So essentially, if we have an interview with Betty and Paul, we will have, you can see here, we've documented what Betty said versus what did Paul say. We want to code them at different cases. So let's say we have Barbara, where Barbara's interview is all what Barbara said. So we code the whole interview to Barbara. However, this interview, which has some data from Betty and some data from Paul, then we do need to have different cases for Betty and Paul. So if I pop down here to people, we should find that we have a case for Betty and a case for Paul. Here we are, we have a case for Betty, case for Paul. And what we do is we then select the data that is coded, that is from Betty, and we code that to the Betty code. And we code what Paul said to the Paul code. And then what we have is the classification sheet, which is Betty's demographics and Paul's demographics, which are separate. And then we can add them to the case. So that's how we deal with focus groups. So excellent question. We definitely separate them out and we can add those demographics. We just need to make sure that each individual, let's say we have a focus group with 5 people, all of those 5 people need to have a case for them. Then we can add the demographic information. So hopefully that makes sense. Please jump in if it doesn't. But yeah, if you think about a case, it's everything about the person. So let's capture every person that we have in the data. And then we want to put everything that they told us to their case. And now I'm about to show you what we do with that. So let me know if that doesn't make sense. Excellent question. I think we're good now. No, I haven't seen anything in the chat. I'm going to jump across. So now we have the project set up. We've got the data where it needs to be. We've got the cases. We've got the demographics. Now we go and ask some questions of the data. I'm going to pop down to our queries. And our query criteria. So the nice thing about the sample project is that we have a bunch of queries that have already been created for us, and we can kind of play with them a little bit. There are, I believe, 8 queries in NVivo. Let me go and check. We have the text search, word frequency, the matrix, and then here are 5 other queries that we can run on the data. So 8 queries that we can run. Some of them I use more than others. Again, I tend to use the ones that are, see here on the ribbon, text search, word frequency, which we've covered, and then the matrix and probably the cross tab are the ones that I would use the most. So that's where we're going to spend the next bit of our time. Honestly, matrix queries are the key to everything. Anytime I'm thinking about a project, I'm automatically thinking about a matrix and how do I bring this data back into a matrix. So if we go back to, the early 80s, Marvin Huberman talked about the concept of compare and contrast in qualitative data, in qualitative analysis, and how do we do that in a way that helps us to reveal, what's going on. So I'm always thinking of what do I want to compare and contrast? Well, I want to compare and contrast what did males as opposed to females say? What did people from different age groups, different occupations, different years of experience, or any of those things, what did they have to say? So this is where we come to queries, which is awesome. So If you'd like me to go back and do the text searches and word frequencies, please let me know. If there's something there that I think you maybe think we missed, jump in and let me know. I can go pop back. Otherwise, we're going to pop straight into our matrix coding queries. I know that in my slides, I did mention a coding query. So coding query is one of the options we have. I personally don't tend to do coding queries because if we think about a coding query, it's like a Venn diagram. It's let's look at what was positive. Come back to our codes for a second. Typical Venn diagram might be, what do people say that was positive? And then what did they say about, say, agriculture? So a coding query might be, compare what was said that was positive and that was said about agriculture. So what are all the positive comments about agriculture? And this does rely very much on that simultaneous coding concept we talked about last week, where we want to code the data to as many places as it applies. That will then lead us to being able to ask the questions we want to ask now about what was, positive about agriculture in one place. So again, I'm going to jump over the coding query because I don't tend to want to look at just two codes together. I want to look at all of them. So for me, the more useful question is, what are all the attitudes against all of the elements of the economy? So what do people say that was positive, negative, mixed and neutral about agriculture, fishing, jobs and tourism? They're kind of the things that I would like to compare against. So therefore, I'm going to come and run a query. And I think the query we're about to run is looking at each of the elements of the economy against each of the elements of the natural environment. Again, I just want to see where the connection is, where they've talked about both of those things. So popping back over to our queries that we have here, you can look at these little icons. And so the one I'm going to look at is the natural environment and the economy down east. So we're going to use one that's already been created for us, and then we're going to create our own. Again, this is where you spend a fair bit of your time. And honestly, this is the fun part. I'm just going to double click, let it run, and then we'll work our way backwards. Hopefully what you can see here is we have our list of all of, if I pop back to my codes, all of my elements of the natural environment here down the left as our rows. And then I have each of the elements of the economy as our columns. So I want to see where the intersection, so again, the two Venn diagrams, so the intersection of agriculture and the intersection of ecosystem services and what sits in the middle. So what's coded at both of them, and do that, multiply that across all of these. Personally, I find looking at a table like this is quite overwhelming and very, very difficult to read because it's just white space numbers and it's really hard. So there's a little way of us to make that easier. So if I click in the table here, I get a new ribbon across the top, which is my matrix ribbon. I always suggest we choose a color scheme, choose a traffic light. I always choose the second one along. So what this now makes this much, much easier to read. I can see where the most coding is and the least coding. So I can see the most coding is where the green is and the least coding where the red is. So this in itself is absolute gold. I've spent a lot of time coding the data to get to this point. So now I get to ask questions on the coding that I've done. So the questions are, how did people talk about different elements of the economy and different parts of the natural environment, and where do they intersect? Okay, so honestly, I could spend an hour writing, at least an hour, writing up this one query and what I'm seeing on the screen. So let me talk you through what that might look like. So as I said, the green indicates the most coding and the red, the least coding. So my first question when I come here is like, what are the patterns that I'm seeing overall? Well, I can see that there's no coding for tourism almost, and there's pretty much no coding for renewable energy. Again, is this what I expect to see? If so, fine. If not, what have I missed? Have I missed some coding somewhere? And these queries help you to realize that. If I'm confident I've done all my coding and this is exactly what I would expect to see, maybe not expect, but it seems right. Awesome. Okay, so then my eye draws to the most obvious pattern. So to me, the most obvious pattern is the green here. So the green, the darkest green, shows the most coding. So I can see there are 22 coding references that talk about environmental change and fishing. So it's the intersection, that Venn diagram, it's the intersection of the two. So if I want to see what were the 22 comments, remember it's coding references, so how many times it was said, not how many people said. There's what I call the banging on factor. Some people, when people may say things multiple times, and if we code them multiple times, we want to be sure to represent that accurately. So if I go here and look at the 22 coding references about fishing, the intersection of fishing and environmental change, and double click, it will take me to all the comments across all my data, whether it's survey or interview data. It will take me across both of them. And this is where I can start to see the mix of the data together. So the very first thing I'm going to point out before we even look at the data here is that we have tabs on the right-hand side. And so those code tabs are really, really easy to miss. And funnily enough, when I wrote my book about version qualitative analysis with NVivo, the book was version 4, edition 4. I noticed in version 3, they didn't really mention these tabs down the right side. And I was like, wow, there's a big gap there. We really need to mention these. They're super, super useful. So if I go firstly to the summary tab, what the summary tab tells me is which files have talked about the natural environment and, has talked about ecosystem services and fishing together. And so I can see Barbara has been coded 4 times to both of those, Charles once, Dorothy 4 times, and so on. So it shows me where that intersection is. The reference tab will show me every instance of the text, so what actual text was coded to both of those codes. So from Barbara, it makes sense if we read this first paragraph that it's coded as fishing and ecosystem services. If I scroll down, I get to Charles, I get to Dorothy, I get to all the rest of the people, and so on. So it really, so again, this is something we can't do manually. It takes me to where the intersection of that coding is, which is very useful. So that would be my first pattern. I would actually open that. I would then create a memo and I would document what I'm seeing in that relationship between fishing and agriculture. Environmental change and fishing. And honestly, I'd probably have a memo for every single one of these cells you have here. So I'm going to have lots and lots of memos, lots of writing. And I would say, okay, there's 0 about agriculture and environmental impacts. Why is that? And I would just make a note to myself, maybe they didn't talk about it. Maybe I didn't ask them. Maybe it wasn't important. Why do I get 0 there? Why did I even include it? What's going on there? So I would do that and I would start with the most pattern, which is the green, 22, and I'll work through each of these green ones. Then I would take myself to the red. So I would ask myself, why when people have talked about tourism, have they not talked about any of these things other than one comment about habitat? Is it not relevant? Is it not important? Have I miscoded? What's going on? So I would write a memo on that as well. And maybe go back and recode if I've missed something. So I almost go to both ends of the extremes, like what's the most and what's the least. And then I'll work my way through. The nice thing here is NVivo does give us a visualization as well. So if I want to visualize that table, I have a chart option on the right-hand side. And it automatically creates a 3D chart for me, which if I hold my mouse down, I can make it dance, which is probably more fun than function. But notice anytime you go into a chart, you do get a chart tab across the ribbon. So I could make this a 2D chart, which maybe is more useful for me to explain what's going on. At any time, we can right click and export our charts out. And of course, they're live data. So if I want to know what were, people saying when they're talking about water quality and fishing or aquaculture, I can double click it and it will take me there. Let's pop back to our table for a second. Essentially, this is your results. So if you think about your writing, you have a results section and you have a discussion section. The results section is what does the data say? This is what the data says. The data says that there are 22 comments about fishing for aquaculture and environmental change, And within my memo, this is what they are saying about that. This is literally what they're saying. That's your results. Your discussion then becomes, so what? What does it mean? Why are there 22 comments around fishing and aquaculture and, you know, 1 comment about landscape and fishing? What's going on there? What's the dynamic? What does that mean? And that's your discussion, the so what. So this is what it says. This is what it means. And that's how we bring these together. We've had many comments in the past saying, does NVivo provide a write thesis button? Unfortunately not. But what it does do is it takes you as far as it can to allow you to then write your discussion. So it will show you all the decisions you've made and the patterns within them, so that then you can go and make decisions about what that means. And that's really what we're here to do, is to help find those patterns in the data, to bring them forward so then we can make sense of them. So NVivo doesn't make sense of them. It's a software program. We can't do that. It's really up to you. But what it does do is it brings it all together. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So I'm going to open it up to any comments or questions around the matrix. We're going to do a few more of these, but I just wanted to do that one at first to start us off. Please let me know. Okay, I can't see anything in the chat or any comments, so I'm going to keep going. Wonderful. Again, this is all in the sample project. We can come back and look at it any time. So let's say we're going to create this for ourselves. Let's say I want to create a query. Okay, so again, what would I do without the software? Well, firstly, I have a question I'd like to ask. And the question I want to ask is, what were the attitudes? We have them documented. What were the attitudes about the economy? So when people talk about fishing, were they positive or negative? When people talk about tourism, were they positive or negative? Or an alternative example might be, my positive and negative might be barriers versus enablers. What are my barriers and enablers to different topics? So for instance, I might have a code called issues, and issues could be time, resources, availability, skills, could be a whole bunch of things. And then I have barriers and enablers to each of them. So I would code in a way where I'm coding to the barrier, whether something is a barrier or enabler, and then what the barrier or enabler is. And then I'm going to bring it back. So in my mind, that's a matrix. And that's what we're going to do here. So hopefully that's starting to make a little sense. So just check your questions here. So I'm going to pop away from this for a second. I'm going to answer your question, going how. So it's a really excellent question. I guess it's not really NVivo coding it, it's you coding it. So you highlighting and coding where people express the body language, their expression, and so on. I guess the challenge is we don't often document the body language, and therefore it makes it almost impossible to code it if we haven't documented it. So I really, really, really love your question, because I would say, well, as we know, I'm not sure the number, but something like 85% of our communication is nonverbal. And what we do in an interview is we listen to what people say and we document that, but we often don't document the nonverbals. And if I'm sitting here like this to start off with, and you ask me questions, that says a whole lot about what I'm saying. If I'm sitting and I'm laughing or I'm crying, or, you know, there's a pause, all of those things say almost more important than what people are saying is how they say it. So it's what's not being said. So I 100% agree with you. What I would do in those instances, I would create a memo for the file, the interview, and I would document this is again your memo going, oh, first they were really uneasy, but then they really got into it, and then they, you know, were making jokes, and then they cried, and then they laughed, and all of these things. And I would document them alongside your data, because what that does is it shows the context. And it's so easy for us to take the data out of context and go, oh, let's just read the text. Again, if you're anything like me, I'm quite sarcastic. So if you literally read the text of, I say this is bad, I probably mean it's good because I'm laughing when I say it. So this is why that context is so important for us to document what's being said, but why it's being said. And we need to capture both of those. So this is where it does get a little more challenging, but exactly where we need to be in qualitative research. It's all about context. So that's why I really love your question, because 100%, let's write about what's not being said. Let's have that in a memo alongside our interview data, and then let's code both of them together. We can code our memo as well. So hopefully that answers your question. Really excellent question. Wonderful. Love that. So again, where we're going to with this query, we're going to run a query ourselves, and we're going to compare the attitudes versus the economy and levels of the economy. So we want to see where the intersection is against both of those. So I'll pop back to my queries. We're going to create a brand new one this time. And again, you can go and play with these. We've got the word frequencies and text searches we did last week. They're here as well. So I'm going to create a brand new query, which is called a matrix coding query. Anytime I come to a query, I want to make the decision about what I want to ask first, before I even look at the software. Because if I'm trying to look at the software, decide what I want to ask, they're two very different processes and it doesn't work. Again, knowing what I want to do without the software first, and then coming to the software and then asking the questions is the best approach. So I have a question as a breakdown of my research questions. What are the attitudes about the economy? That's what I'm going to ask here. So I've opened a matrix coding query, and it's going to be a table essentially. So I'm going to take these attitudes here and just drag them across to be my rows. I personally need to have positive first. So I'm going to just move that to the top. There we go. And then negative as well. Then if I want to compare against each element of the economy, I can drag them across here to my columns. I generally would save it, because having a list of all the questions I've asked is super, super helpful, and I would 100% recommend that. I'm not going to in this instance, just for demo's sake, I'm going to run that. Again, what we're doing right now, you can't do unless you've done all the hard work before this. You've done all the coding, all the setting up, all the foundations. That then allows us to do what we're doing, which again, you can't do this without software, which is such an incredible thing for us to be able to do. So I have a table. Again, it doesn't make much sense because it's all white and grey and not very interesting. I'm going to come up to my matrix ribbon at the top and turn on a no, it actually doesn't matter, Christine. You flip them either. It just depends on how they show up on the screen. 100% doesn't matter. Excellent question. So now what I have my positive, negative, mixed and neutral against agriculture, fishing, jobs and tourism. So I'm looking at again, that Venn diagram. I'm looking at like 20 of those on the screen, or 16 of them, and the intersection between them. So again, the most obvious pattern I can see is there are 122 negative comments about fishing, which again, as I look at the whole, it's quite different to 34 positive comments about fishing. So there's they're quite different. The patterns are different. So keeping in mind that when people talk, if they're talking about something negative, they often say it many times. If they're talking about something positive, they often only say it once. So just in context, keeping that in mind. But from here, I would absolutely look for the most obvious pattern first, which is the bright green. So I would go and look at what were the 122 negative comments about fishing. And again, this brings in our surveys and our interview data together. I would probably have a memo for every single one of those cells. So a memo for the overall query and one for every cell in the query. And then I would write about what I'm seeing in each of those cells. So what I'm seeing here is what Barbara, what Charles, what Dorothy or Robert, actually all of them have said about the intersection of fishing that's negative. And then I would write, well, what are they negative about? Okay, it might be 5 main things they're negative about. Then I can go and report on that. So it's getting me to that point of bringing it all together. And if I scroll all the way down, we'll start to see some survey. There's some social media data, and here's all my survey data here. So it's kind of treating it the same way as my interview data, which is exactly what we want. Then I would look at the other side of it, which is the patterns that have the least coding. So I'd say, well, people didn't really have positive and negative comments about agriculture or tourism for that fact. What's going on there? Is that what I expect to see? There's 5 negative comments, no positive comments. Have I miscoded, or is that what's going on? And I would write about that. Interestingly, there are 20 comments about jobs and cost of living and 20 comments about that are positive and 20 that are negative. I think that's just by accident. It's nothing. So I would like to go and see, well, people are not overwhelmingly happy or overwhelmingly unhappy about jobs and cost of living. What's going on and what does that mean? Let's double click and let's write about that. So let's write about what they're saying that's negative. Let's then write about what's positive. And that's what we would do with that. Again, we have a chart here if you would like. I find that's not always the most useful thing. If I pop to the chart tab, maybe a different chart gives me a better insight into that. And of course, I can export my charts out at any time and use them. And just back to your question about, does it matter about row or column, Christine? No, definitely not, because I have an option here on my matrix tab where I can transpose, which literally just flips my table around. So and to be honest, the way I decide is usually, how do I want to visualize it? If I have many down this side, I'll make them as rows and then fewer across the columns, just so they fit better on the screen. And you'll see that in a moment as well. But yeah, it doesn't actually matter. Awesome. So hopefully feeling like this makes a bit of sense and how to bring. So you should have questions going, oh, I want to do these matrices. I want to run all these things and look at the connections between them and those Venn diagrams. Hopefully we're feeling good with that. What I'd love to do right now is we're going to jump in and look at a matrix like this with our demographic data. So what does that look like? So let's say I want to look at each of the elements of the economy by gender, by age, by where they live and so on. So what we've done here is we've done codes and codes in our matrix. We're now going to do codes and attribute values. So and there's endless variations of these. Like I said, you could spend 3 months doing these. There's lots and lots and lots of questions you can ask once you've done the the coding of the data. So let's pop down and we're going to do, okay, again, I'm going to define the question first. So absolutely not. Cases encoded, 100%. Cases versus, okay, so I think your question is, can I look at each of the cases versus each of the codes? 100%. So if I want to see what did each person say that was about each elements of the economy, I think that's what you're asking. So let's do that one first before I jump into the other. So excellent question. If I'm wrong, please clarify. So awesome. Excellent question. So noting that we have a case for each person here, we have created them when we created our cases. We're going to look at each of our people against each of the codes. Excellent question. Let's do that. So once more, I'm going to do a new matrix query. And to be honest, I spend months and months doing matrix coding queries. They are honestly your best friend. Okay, so here I want to do each case. I often draw these. I actually almost draw my matrices first before I come to the software. So let's say I want to take each of my cases here. Perfect. Oops. Just click them again. I'm going to drag them to my rows. They're all here. Awesome. Then I want to compare what did each person say against each element of the economy. Hopefully I'm on track with what you were thinking. I would generally save that, give it a name, document that. I'm just going to run it for now. Give it a moment to catch up with us. Awesome. Again, I always turn on like a traffic light system because it makes it so much easier to read. So now I can see what each person said against each of those categories. So it makes sense the majority of the coding is about phishing, because if we look at the number there, 367 references, that's where the majority of the coding is. So it kind of makes sense. But I can see what each person said. So I can see that Dorothy had more to say than pretty much everyone else about phishing. Only a couple of people had comments about tourism, and only a few people had comments about agriculture. little bit in the middle for fishing. Oh, sorry, jobs. But if I want to see what did Dorothy say about fishing, I would double click and I would then make some notes about that in in Dorothy's memo. 100% takes me right there. Awesome. So it gives me this really nice overview of what people are saying against each topic. So you can probably see endless variations of this. I could do this against each person in positive, negative. I could do it against natural environment and any of those different options. So 100%, that's how we use those cases. Again, the reason why we use a case is we only want to represent each person once. And so by drawing this, Betty has multiple files, but because she's a case, it only refers to everything about her once. Love that. Hopefully that answers your question. Really excellent question. So as I was about to do, I'm going to now compare, let's say, each of the elements of the economy against, let's say, gender as a first point of call. Just close the ones I have open. Pop down to my queries, my query criteria. I'm going to create a new query, and the query is going to be, again, I've drawn it on my paper first. So I'm going to do each element of the economy versus male, female. It's a little bit different this time because we're tapping into what we call the case classifications, which we haven't really done yet. But if you think of every attribute you have, age, gender, location, years of experience, there's a question or query we can run in Vivo about every single one of them. Let's do a new query. We get a new matrix coding query. Again, these are your best friend. So I said I want to look at each of the economies by gender. Now, if I want to look at gender in our demographics, it's a slightly different way to get there. I can't drag and drop per se. So bear with me with this and you'll have the recording. I'm going to click on my plus sign here and select items. Always the first option, not the second one, even though the second one makes sense. So bear with me here. So let's always choose the first option, select items. I'm going to take you down a little rabbit hole, but again, you'll have the recording and you can come back later. So I come down to case classifications. You may hear me in your head when you do this, but don't tick it. Case classification, don't tick it. Click on the plus sign next to person, don't tick it. Click on the plus sign next to gender, don't tick it because it's a label. What I actually want, and this is why it's useful to draw it first, is to draw, I want the economy codes against male, female. And this is why drawing it first directs me to what I want to select. And okay, and that's where I get female and male. Again, I generally save it as an audit trail for all the questions I've asked. I won't for the moment. I'm going to run that query. Okay, it doesn't look like much, but there's a lot that's gone on behind this. Once more, I'm going to turn on my traffic light system first up and see where the patterns are. So once more, I would have a memo where I'd write about generally what I'm seeing here as a result, and then I would have a memo for each of these cells I have here. So what can I see? I can see that there are 91 comments from males about fishing, 67 from females. I would, of course, need to go back to my sample and see, do I have more males than females, and what are my numbers there, and how does that kind of add up? Was it that men had said more about it than women, or were there just more men? So they're the kinds of questions I would ask. Then I can double click and go, okay, well, what were the 91 comments from men about fishing? This is what were the 67 comments about women about fishing. And I would toggle between the two. And I would then go and write about what each of them are telling me. As I've mentioned a number of times, these are coding references. Thanks, Nah. Love your feedback there. So as I mentioned, these are coding references, how many times it was said, not how many people said it. So we need both views. So keeping in mind that, again, how many times it was said. If I come to cell coding, again, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. If I come to cases coded in person, watch the numbers and we'll see how they change. So 91 comments from males about fishing came from 69 men. So often, as I said, some people say things multiple times. So we want to just make sure that it's in context. So we had 91 comments from 69 men. And therefore I would write about that. Double clicking will take me to all of them. Want to go back at any time, I just take it back to my coding references. 60, yep, there we are. So hopefully that's making sense. Again, the table looks quite simplistic, but there's so much work behind that. And it tells you so much about what's going on in your data. And so what we've done so far is we've done codes, and we've done codes and attribute values. Hoping that's kind of making sense to bring it all back out. And then literally we just write about that. So one last query I'd love us to tap on, just conscious of time and filling this out very quickly. The last query I'd love us, I'm going to close this, is the crosstab. Let me show you the crosstab. And this is where we can also get a little bit more info for our mixed method study as well. I'm going to come down to our query criteria, and there's a crosstab option here for us. So a crosstab is basically the same as the matrix coding query, but it allows us to add 2 attribute values. So age and gender, age and community, whatever that might be. So it allows us to kind of add a bit more to the question we ask. So I'm going to give you the example first, and then we'll create our own. So I'm going to double click and open up the crosstab of economic issues. So economy by age and gender. So 2 variables, I guess, for lack of a better word. Let's open that one up. Give it a moment to catch up. Again, there's so much work that's been done to get to this point. Thinking. It's gone out for Saturday afternoon fun time. It's catching up with us. We're nearly there. Thinking. No. Anytime, Christine. Absolutely. No. Definitely not today. No, I'd actually prefer not today after 3 hours of teaching. 100%. Contact me. I'm happy to set up a 10-minute anytime, and we can do that anytime at all. Let's say it's Tuesday. You want to set up a meeting? We'll do it 10 minutes. No problem at all. Okay, excellent. So again, what we have here, so we have each of our codes down the left. You're very welcome. Each of our codes down the left here, and each of our attribute groups, and then values below. So I'm going to turn on a traffic light system just because it makes it so much easier to read. Here we go. So the crosstab, I literally just went to one that was already created for us. So I've gone into the sample project and double clicked on the crosstab. I will show you how to create your own just before we finish up today. So I've just used an example we already have, then I will show you. Thank you so much, Rue. So what this is showing me is we have, so in the age group 30 to 39, we have 5 people. And in that group, we have 3 females and 2 males. And this is the coding references in terms of each of the topics they've talked about. So I can see there are 3 comments, again, references, 3 comments from females about fishing, 2 from men, and 1 from about tourism. Sorry, jobs and cost of living. I scroll across. So really it's giving me just another, it's kind of like another layer to the matrix query where I can add another attribute value. So it's showing me how each person, each group, sorry, each cohort essentially is represented with each of those categories. Oops. Scroll all the way along. Oh gosh, come on now. It's gotten a little bit slow on me. Let's go all the way to the end. Just thinking about it. Again, this is where I draw it. I'll go, well, what were the 2 variables, for lack of a better word, that I'd like to see against each of my codes that I have. Come on. It's misbehaving now. All the way to the end. I did this before the class and it was really slow. Then I restarted it and it was much faster. And now it's gone back to being very slow, I think, because we're on Teams. But when I get all the way to the very end, it will show me a mean. It will show me some stats on that. Here we are. So it will show me third quartile, the standard deviation, and also if I go back a little bit, I think it shows me the mean as well. So it's really just, again, showing me a different representation of how those things are connected. Come on, MBO. don't fail me now, right at the very end. Of course, it happens when I'm teaching. It's just gotten very, very slow. Ah, goodness. Okay, it's not going to be kind to me by the looks of it. And then we have this is a very new feature in NVivo that we have. So you won't find that in like earlier versions. If you update, you'll find it. You then have a PCA and a pivot box. So these are just different ways of representing the same results. Yeah, that may be useful for you. And my computer has decided to go to lunch, a late lunch. Yeah, it's very, very slow. So again, to create that, we would right click here in the white space, create a cross tab. I can drag and drop the codes that I have. And over here, I can choose the attribute values that I would like to include. So once I've run this, I might go, oh, I don't really want gender. I want to go back and do that by community or by years of experience, whatever that might be. And this is why the queries are amazing, because you can come back and ask many, many, many different questions. So here's our pivot box. It's giving me the PCA and then the pivot box. So just different ways of looking at the data and making sense of it and letting you get to where you need to be. So I think that kind of brings us to our end of today, which is sad, but hopefully, I know it's a lot. Today is a lot. I completely understand. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay. You can go and have a little nap now if you like. But essentially what NVivo, or what today was about, is like, what else can I do with NVivo? And what are the extra features? Again, you may not get to these for 3 months, 6 months, so on. You have the recording. So let's just recap. We started last week where we set up a project. We brought some data in. We did some coding and created codes and organized them. We then ran some basic queries around word frequencies and text searches, which may be useful for our coding. Today, we started with what does a good coding scheme look like? How do we organize our codes in a way that's useful? Then from that, we moved to setting up some queries. What kinds of questions do we want to ask of the data? Let's work it through quite systematically. So what are the questions that come from our research questions? Are they represented in my list of codes? So if they're not, then I can't ask the questions. But if they are, then I can start to come and run matrices and crosstabs, where I can say, let's look at where things intersect. So again, a lot of it is in the setup. If I haven't done simultaneous coding, if I haven't set the codes up that I need, I'm not able to ask the questions that I want. So the more time you spend in planning, again, not saying that anything is wrong, we can always fix things. But if we think about like as much as possible how we want to set things up, our future self will thank us, and we will have hopefully better outcomes. So I'm going to leave it there. Any questions, comments, I certainly open that up to you. Again, lots going on, but hopefully this has been a useful session for you to take forward. Again, I'm always available. So that 10-minute is available to everyone. Just shoot me a quick message if you need, and we can jump on. And it's certainly not about selling my services. It's about just going, how do you not get stuck? How to help you to move forward. And I'm more than happy to do that for no cost. Awesome. Thank you so much for your comment. Thank you, Christine. I appreciate that. I know, right? Sometimes it's just the right time, what you need right now. Sometimes it's what you need in 3 months' time. And then you come back and go, oh my goodness, that was so helpful. We're all at different stages. So it's just what we need right now. Yeah, a lot to process, Emmett, 100%. I've given you a lot. So certainly take that on board, take what you need right now, and let's find what you need for the next steps forward. So super, super helpful. Thank you, Patrick. Thanks, Rusim. Really appreciate that. Thanks, Nah. But honestly, hopefully through the complexity of what we're doing here, hopefully you can find your way through that and get to the other side. And I'm certainly here to help you to do that. Any final questions, let me know. But certainly I'm not throwing you out on a ledge. I'm here if you need anything going forward. And the Institute is here for you going forward in terms of providing resources that you need. But don't be shy in asking for help. Thank you, Mohammed. You're very, very welcome. So you'll get the recording for today. And again, thank you for taking time out on your Saturday to be here. Hopefully it's been a useful resource for your research going forward. So I'll close the session now. Yes, I believe that you will get the recording now. That will come to you via the Institute, and they will give you access to that. I believe we're all going to get access to that recording. So definitely. And I think you have access to last week's as well. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have an amazing rest of your Saturday, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.